Hi, I'm Nancy Mahoney, and I'm here with my special exhibit in Grand Rapids at Quilt Weeks. And my exhibit is about my 35 years of making quilts. When I first started making quilts in the 80s, they were kind of small quilts, and I don't have any of those quilts with me, but I do have quilts that I made from the 90s up until last year. And so I wanted to share those with all the people here in Grand Rapids. I have all my favorite quilts are here, and how do you pick a favorite? It's pretty hard. But there's a wide range of things that I do. This is one of my red and white quilts that I made for a magazine. And I picked all of these fabrics out of my stash. I have quite a large stash. In fact, I have a room full of fabrics. And so when I want to make a scrappy quilt, I just go to my fabric room and select my colors because all my fabrics are divided by color. So I use lots of beiges in this quilt as my backgrounds and lots of reds, because red is one of my favorite colors. All right, now this quilt is a red, white, and blue quilt. And I had originally thought about making this quilt as a Quilts of Valor, and it would have been published in Love of Quilting, in which it was published in Love of Quilting. But when we looked at the design, we decided because it was a two-block quilt that it needed to be balanced. And with two-block quilts, it's often better if you use an even number of blocks in an even number of rows. So it came out as a square quilt. So it's not truly a Quilts of Valor because it doesn't fit within the parameters for the size requirements, but it certainly could be used as a throw for your favorite veteran. And I called it West Point. It was also done as a lesson on one of the PBS shows that I did with Love of Quilting. And I wanted to show you this quilt in particular because it's one of my very early quilts. It's the only quilt that I've done that is completely hand-pieced and hand-quilted. So it's English paper pieced, 60-degree diamonds to make tumbling blocks. And then I hand-quilted it. It's the only quilt I have in the exhibit that's hand-quilted because I really quit hand-quilting a long time ago. But this one was made back in the 90s. In fact, it was made right around 1994. Maybe even, well, it probably started in 92 because it was completed in 94, and it did take me 2 years to complete the quilt. And I've really kind of forgotten which AQS show it was juried into, but it was a semifinalist in either the 94 show or the 95 show. And I was very proud. Now, when you look at my exhibit, you're going to notice that my color palette has changed over the years. In the 90s, I was using much darker colors. They were probably what you'd find more in your quilt shops. And as I progress as a quilter, and certainly today, my color palette has become lighter and brighter. During one period of time, I did a lot of 30s quilts, 30s reproduction quilts. I did 3 books on using newspaper clippings, patterns that you would clip out of the newspapers that were available during the 30s, and reproduce those and put them in my books. And I reproduced them with 30s reproduction fabrics. And I did 8 or 9 collections of 30s reproduction fabrics. So this is a quilt called Road to Paradise that I did for one of the magazines more recently, but I went back to my collections of 30s and used those fabrics to create this scrappy quilt. I tied it together because there's so many fabrics. I tied it together with this yellow, which becomes sort of a background fabric, but it ties the quilt together and lets your eye have a place to rest. And it's really one of my favorites because it is from the 30s period of fabrics. And this scrappy quilt is called Peanut Butter Kisses. When I started thinking about designing this quilt, I realized I really didn't use much orange. I didn't have much orange in my fabric stash, and I hardly ever used it in my quilts. And so I challenged myself to use orange. And I put it with my black and white fabrics. I love black fabrics, and I love using them with white fabrics. So instead of putting it with red, which is my typical palette, I put it with orange to create this great scrappy quilt that's made with half square triangle units. It's really a very easy quilt to make, but it looks more complicated. And that's the type of quilt I like to make. One that you look at and think, that's really hard, but it isn't when you really break it down into its individual components. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you down the road at another Quilt Week.